I'ma need a sentimental man or woman to pump me up. Feeling fussy, walking in my Balenciennes, trying to bring out the fat bit lust. Cause I give a fuck way too much. I'ma need like 2 shots in my cup. Wanna get up, wanna get down. That's how I feel right now. Oh, I've been so down and under pressure. I'm way too fine to be distressed, yeah. Oh, I'm not the girl I was or used to be.
Hello.
But you might be, yeah. Turn up the music,
Hi.
turn down the lights. I got a feeling I'm gonna be alright, okay,
Hello.
alright. It's about damn time. Turn up the music,
Hi, everybody. Introduce yourself in the chat.
I got a feeling I'm gonna be okay, alright. It's about damn time. Cause you know what time it
Hello.
is. I'm coming out tonight. I'm coming out tonight. I'm coming out tonight. I'm coming out tonight. Woo! I'm coming out tonight. I'm coming out tonight. Okay.
Hello.
Alright. It's about damn time. I'm coming out tonight. 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 Okay. Alright. It's about damn time. Yeah. Yeah. It's about damn time.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome today to our live webinar. We're going to be diving into many juicy topics, such as book bans, the erosion of our democracy, spirit murdering, and how to embody anti racist values. Dr. Nicole Evans is going to bring the real talk and share the real actions she took to boycott Scholastic and partner with a local Black owned bookstore 9 years ago. So, this
Yeah.
is not a new issue, right? This marginalization has been happening as old as time because systemic racism and white supremacy culture is ever present. And unfortunately, in today's current political climate, um, there's even more challenges and threats to the very notion of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, in today's webinar, we want to dive into all of these things and do it a little bit differently. We're going to use a case study model with the Scholastic case specifically, which allows us to analyze the situation more thoroughly, build our own awareness and critical consciousness on what the dilemmas are, why they're happening, and what we can do about it within our individual sphere of influence, as well as our collective power. What we can do in response to these trying times.
All right. So I am going to share my story a little bit later. But just as I'm thinking about the bigness of it, my story really is about the marginalization of my students, right? This story happened back in 2015. And what I'm feeling, to your point, Daisy, is here we are again. And in some ways, it's even worse. My
Hmm.
thoughts go to, since the affirmative action ruling, lawsuits have been filed against a venture capital firm for helping businesses led by women of color and against a law firm with diversity recruiting practices. Just last month, a group that opposes affirmative action sued West Point, alleging that it inappropriately uses race and ethnicity in making admissions decisions. The court's earlier ruling didn't cover military academies. These are just a few example of how in today's climate, where it is a pull to actively reverse the
Mhm.
progress that we've made.
Mhm. Yep. And so for those who are not familiar with Scholastic, this will be a review overview of this case. And those who are familiar, please do chime in the chat and add to the nuance. Scholastic is a children's book publisher, um, that recently announced that its elementary school book fairs would have a separate section for titles that deal with race, gender, and sexuality. This is in part a response to what Dr. Evans just brought up, these state laws that are restricting how these subjects are discussed, or if they're even allowed to be discussed
That
in schools. And these book fairs, the schools that are organizing the book fairs can choose to include or exclude that set of books that's rebranded to known as Share Every Story, Celebrate Every Voice. It's a very ironic
mm,
title.
right,
Um,
right.
that's
Yeah,
optional.
right. It's optional.
uh,
No longer
it's
included.
optional to share every story. If
Right,
you want to celebrate every voice,
right.
you can
Maybe.
choose to celebrate every voice.
Yeah,
Uh, so, it's come to this, and we want to hear from you all and have a discussion around what are all the dilemmas in this case.
yeah. Drop it in the chat. What are the dilemmas here for those of you who know about it? We're gonna come on, join us in this conversation.
And we can start it off as well, Dr. Evans, because
Yeah,
we've talked about this
yeah,
extensively.
yeah.
Do you wanna start, or would you like me to?
Yeah, yeah. I think like the dilemmas are so vast. Like the biggest dilemma for me as a woman of color, and maybe you too, Daisy, is that it's not a choice for me. Any
Mhm.
day, my identity, my sense of belonging, my sense of being, and so to
Yeah.
water it down as well, it's a choice, and honestly not taking a stand and making a stand
Mhm.
here, it is a dilemma for me, for a book company as large as Scholastic, and I'll talk more about that later. But what are you thinking about in terms of
Yeah.
uh, yeah.
I would underscore that, Dr. Bettina Love describes that as spirit murdering. Right?
Mm,
It's a concept that American schools are murdering the souls of Black and Brown children every day through these kinds of decisions, these systemic, institutionalized, anti Black, state sanctioned violence. Because if you go into a school, right, that's supposed to be educating you, and
right.
yet you can't see yourself in the curriculum, if
That
you're not seeing yourself in the stories you're reading, if
that
you're not seeing uplifting examples of, your people, your ancestors, your language, then it becomes othered. It
yeah.
becomes either on the fringes or completely erased.
Yes, yes. And or even worse, I will never forget Kiara, a student. She said to me, her teacher was so excited. I was doing a classroom observation, and she pulls out this book because she knows that equity and all of that is important to me. And she says, "We're going to read. This is going to be a part of our read aloud. We're going to do this." Her Kiara's hand went up. And it's for this that, and other reasons, but mainly this, that I've never forgotten her name. Kiara said, "Don't tell me this book is going to be about a Black family where the mother and the father died and the child is raised." Like the books that were being presented was not her story. It was a story of struggle. It was the story of deficit. It was the
Mhm.
story of a story that even though the face on the cover of the book was black, was
Right.
just one of negativity. Um,
Trauma porn, kind of, right? Trauma porn.
exactly, exactly. And the teacher looked at me, not knowing how to respond to that. And that was a very real question that she had. So
Mhm.
thinking about that too. So come on, y'all.
Yeah.
What do y'all think? What are the dilemmas here in this
Yeah.
scholastic
Yeah.
situation here?
Well,
What do you
even
think? Yeah,
what you said, Dr. Evans, at the beginning with the examples of the lawsuits, the
yeah,
ridiculous, absurd lawsuits that are now coming out, funded
mm,
by right-wing philanthropists,
yeah,
as nonprofits like Embracing Equity are losing funding,
mm,
because we are focused on diversity, equity, inclusion. These kinds of lawsuits present a real threat for schools, right? Especially you were principal at a public school. In
yeah,
these public schools, you could be fired
mm,
if you teach this content, if you make these materials, these books accessible. What do you do when you're in that kind of a hostile environment and your job, your livelihood is at risk?
yeah.
That's a serious dilemma.
That's probably really close to the dilemma. Like there are many, but that is definitely high there on the list. What do you do? What do organizations such as ours, Embracing Equity, who says we've got to do this work, we've got to get it out there? And if folks are saying, well, it's no longer the right thing to fund, it's no longer the right thing to
Mhm.
financially support. And the message that they're sending to me is there was this big push in what we're now affectionately referring to as the summer of anti-racism when George Floyd was murdered, right?
Mhm.
Everybody jumped in, everybody. So the question, the juxtaposition of that is,
Yeah.
does it take someone losing their life publicly for
Yeah.
us to decide and think that this is the right thing to fund lawsuits, to your point, left and right, saying, no, we're not doing that anymore? Come on,
Yeah.
come on, come on, come on, come on.
Right. Exactly.
What are we
Yeah.
doing? What are we
I
doing?
mean, so for me as a former public high school teacher, this did happen to me.
Mm,
And I was told I was not allowed to say systemic racism,
mm.
white privilege, or
Ooh,
Black Lives Matter in my class. And
wow.
and once that line was drawn, it became very clear that then I was faced with a choice, and this is in my case, I was faced
Right.
with a choice of either functioning as part of a complacent racist system,
Mm,
or I had to take a stand and model for my students, the whole point of education,
yeah.
in my mind, as an educator, is to create a more inclusive democracy.
That.
And so for me, I quit mid-year.
Mm,
And I
wow.
left the school. Um, um, and that was a choice that I had to make. It was a really
Yeah.
difficult choice. But if we think about, like, what is the purpose of education? I wasn't able to um, censor, you know, some of the most foundational aspects of our society that needs to be addressed. We are doing a disservice to our children when they are not equipped
Right.
to talk about their own identities and their own these big societal issues that
Yeah.
they're inheriting,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
That we've inherited. Censoring and trying to shield them from this is a profound disservice. Um, and so, that was a dilemma that
Yeah.
I personally faced. Um, and I could see it again here
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
trying to control
Yes.
the narrative, control what children are exposed to, control what teachers are able to teach,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a dilemma to that control. I'm just looking at the chat over here. Anna says, the frustration seems to be that Scholastic has such a huge influence. And while they're trying, they're not necessarily using their privilege for good, their scope of influence. We
Yeah.
all need diverse books and not, right here, Anna, right here, what you said, not
Mhm.
just during the theme month. Come on, Anna. Yes. Yes, right there. Right there. Right there. We need it.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not
So,
just
yeah.
Asian American for 1 month, right? Like, it's my identity, it's my humanity all year.
And you show up every day in the classroom with that humanity, right?
Mhm. Yep.
Except when you're told it's just during this time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or not at all.
Or not at all. Not at all. Yeah. That for sure.
Well, Dr. Evans, could you share, take us back to 2015 when you were the principal and you were faced with this dilemma of choosing a Scholastic book fair or, shifting and trying something more in alignment with your school's values? How did you handle that as a leader?
Okay. So right now, y'all, I'm doing it. I'm going to unlock the power of this story. And so, what I want you to do, lean in and go with me 9 years ago in 2015. It was that time of year, parent teacher conferences. We were excited that parents would be in the building, hearing about how their children were faring. They would be hearing about how they could further support the education of their children and to assist the school. Now, the book fair at the school where I lived was just like any other. It was a beloved event, right? And so it helped raise monies for the school as well. And so as we began to prepare for this, we took that opportunity, mentioning funding. We talked about funding earlier, as sort of an easy way. The parents were already there in the building. And you know what we were saying? Come on, y'all, find out about your kids and open up those wallets, right? That's what we were saying. And so we were thinking about, also on the parent end, parents would often say to us, we love that the book fair is here because this is a better way to reward our children for what we were hearing about, for working hard in school. So win-win, right? Win-win situation. Well, yes, but what about our commitment to serving students? What about all students? What about our commitment of being an A-bar school, anti-bias, anti-racist? Our population was 51% students of color, mainly Black students. How are
Mhm.
we going to walk the talk of this banner that we had bestowed upon ourselves? So let me tell you what happened. So we did our research. We knew what we were going to do. I called, you know, Scholastic and said, we'd like to order a book fair. And so what happened was as as we talked about being an A-bar school, I was taking my also deepening my personal journey of raising my own critical
Mm.
consciousness. And so I knew, Daisy, I said, something has to be different in this upcoming school years for the book fair. It had to be different. I had to walk the talk and not just say, we're an A-bar school. And so
Mhm.
I began to ask questions of Scholastic. Okay, so can we have school books that will represent, this community and that community, and thinking about gender, thinking about abilities. And I was really initially met with silence. It was as
Mm.
if no one had ever asked that question before. In fact, I believe that's what the person said to me on the other end of the line, that no one had really asked that.
Mm.
And then I said, but surely you have some books that meet the needs of my particular, learning environment, of my particular group of students. And so I think they began to say, "Oh, well, there probably are some books in there, and there will be some titles." And I pushed like, "How many titles? What are the titles?" Right? I began to
Mhm.
like push to say, "What are you sending me?" And because I was not met with what I considered sufficient answers, or really any answers around that,
Yeah.
I had to decide, I had to think about an alternative. And so I to be honest, I was scared. The
Yeah.
parents I was nervous. The parents were like, "Book fair, it's my one opportunity. I take off work to volunteer to run." Like, I knew there was a lot riding on this. I knew this was a pivotal moment in my pretty fresh leadership right there at the school. And so I then begin to lean out and think, how can I walk the talk? Could I support? Could this be a both and? Could this be a way to show the leaders and the parents and the teachers, could this be a way to show them about my leadership, and did I really mean what I said I was going,
Mhm.
what I
Right.
was going to do? Am I going to help transform this school and to be a model for other schools and leaders and people who are doing this work? And so I had heard about this brand new children's bookstore called I See Me,
Mhm.
EYESEEMEE, right? There it is in the chat, where they were showing that mirror piece for students to see themselves represented. So I called them up and they were so excited and very happy to support me with this. It was a smaller book fair. I was nervous. It was smaller. It wasn't, because Scholastic has books and toys. I mean, they have like everything there. And I was also nervous about, quite frankly, my white families and what they might think about it, right?
Mm.
And would they say, well, what's going on here? So that was the beginning of how I said we're not doing it, and how I then had to communicate that we were boycotting, and that this was going to be our way forward, not only just this year, but every year.
Mhm.
Yeah. It was rough. It was a scary moment. It was a yet a pivotal moment.
Well, so what were the implications after it launched, and it was a successful launch, even
It
though it was a smaller book fair, it was a high quality, high representation book fair. What kinda impact did you feel?
Let me tell you what the impact is. First, before I tell you the specific impact, I'm going to share what I believe is the importance, and it'll make sense as I talk about this, of inclusive storytelling and representation
Okay.
in
Yeah.
education, right? What I will tell you, allow me, if you will, to share some data with you. I wrote this down, so I'm reading right now.
Yeah.
According to the 2023 report from the Children's Defense Fund, 51, just like my school at the time, 51% of children in the United States are children of color.
Mhm.
So when we consider the importance of storytelling and how to include families and their cultures that are sitting in our schools today,
Mhm.
right? But at the same time, these cultures are underrepresented in literature and books. The data speaks for itself. Here's another piece of data that you might find interesting. In the United States, publishing data by the Cooperative Children's Book Center shows that in 2018, there were more children's books about animals and other non human characters than
Mm.
all people of color combined. 27% were about animals
Yeah.
versus 23% about people of color. And in contrast, over half of all books included in this study featured white characters. And here's more. We talked about your identity as being Asian. Some people of color are at an even greater disadvantage. That same center, the Cooperative Children's Book Center, found that only 1% of books featured indigenous characters,
Mm.
5% Latinx characters, and 7% Asian Pacific Islanders. And let
Mm.
me give you this final piece that goes back to the impact.
Mhm.
2 and 3, that's 67% of children, believe,
Mm.
believe that seeing characters like them in books will enable them to feel like they can achieve anything.
Mhm.
However, 58% of parents admit it's difficult to find books that do represent their children. Now, I can go further with data about the connection between reading and achievement, but
Yeah.
that's a future webinar. We'll circle back
Yeah,
around.
literacy. Yeah,
Literacy,
literacy is a
right?
huge equity issue, right?
Huge equity issue. We'll circle back around. So going back, connecting to the question that you asked me, what's the implication?
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you the implication that I felt when I stood there at the IC meeting.
Yeah.
The implication was the Black children, literally their faces lighting up. She looks like me.
Yeah.
I could be that girl. Her hair's just like mine. And these were not what I call, for lack of better term, struggle books, right?
Right.
These were about Black families. These were
Mhm.
about Black love. These were about Black hair and how wonderful those were. That's what these books were about.
Mhm.
And our communication to our families were, this is it, y'all. This is what it means when we're saying true democracy in our schools. This is the commitment that we made. This was our commitment. This was it.
And everybody wins.
Eh, Come on.
Everybody wins. Like there's no losers in that situation. It reminds me of the Audre Lorde quote. It's not our differences that divide us. It's our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those
Mm,
differences.
mm, mm. Yeah. And in schools, one way that we celebrate, recognize, and accept our differences is through literature and books.
Mhm.
When we use school supports and traditions, such as book fairs in schools, to make it optional, right?
Yeah.
To highlight our beautiful differences, that divides us, to Audrey's point. That
Yeah.
is what divides us.
Yeah.
And so I just, compel you. This is not about demonizing Scholastic, but it is about the power of these
Mhm.
stories. It is about true
Yeah.
democracy in education. It is about taking action even when you're scared. I was scared.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
have to say that people say, "Oh, you just know what to do and the next steps to take." I don't. Listen, y'all,
Yeah.
I don't. I don't. And
Mhm.
I was scared. What's striking to me is here we are again. That was 9 years ago. And here we are. It is a threat to democracy to go backwards. It is a threat to democracy to have these lawsuits going. It is a direct threat to democracy to take a moment and not turn it into a movement. We've got
Mhm.
to sustain. We've got
Yeah.
to keep pushing. Yeah, we've got to
And
keep doing that.
and y
Okay.
and you have the lived experience as a Black woman in a family with a legacy of educators, to deeply understand what's on the line if you don't create these kinds of opportunities for children and their families, right? To be included in
Yeah.
school, to feel affirmed in their education. Like you know what it's like, you lived it, you know what it's like. And that's a critical aspect of the strength you bring as a principal at that time, as a leader now, right?
Yeah.
You have that perspective, and the skills to navigate scary and new terrain when it comes to creating your own book fair, you know but it's also more risk. Like as
Yeah.
a Black principal, and there's so few, it's also more risk. And especially in today's climate, there's an even bigger
Yeah.
bullseye. Um, so, it was really interesting when we were talking about Scholastic specifically.
Yeah.
We looked up the senior leadership and found it was, overwhelmingly white.
Yeah.
There's one Black woman who was in charge of HR
Yeah.
for 20 years,
Yeah.
and then just last year was promoted to their chief of inclusion, which we
Yeah.
saw, as trending
Yes.
post 2020. A lot of these chief of diversity, equity,
Yes.
inclusion roles popping up. And then now what we're seeing is those same, people of color are the ones who are getting fired, who are getting
Yep.
blamed for the organization's lack of infrastructure and vision to realize a true organization that is dedicated to diversity, equity, inclusion, right?
Yeah.
You can't just have a mascot.
No.
You need to have actual, systemic changes within the organization. So I'm curious, as a leader, when you went through this, how did your school community respond to this decision? How did it impact your own leadership,
Yeah.
um, in terms of your ability to lead that school, but also in
Yeah.
your leadership today?
So the one of the things that how it impacted the community, the first thing that I had to, once I sat there and just said, I just told Scholastic, we're not using them. Like I sat in my chair and was like, oh, oh, I just did a thing without really checking with anybody. I just did a thing. And so I then said, how am I going to communicate this? So I then
Mhm.
communicated it to the community. I didn't want them walking in the building like, oh, even though that might have been okay. I don't know. However, I communicated and I said, this is the work. This
Yeah,
is what it
right.
means. I will tell you, overwhelmingly, my parents of color were so excited and happy to see what I'm going to talk about. And some of you have heard window and mirror. Window and mirror.
Mhm. Yeah,
Finally, there was
can you tell us
a
about that? Can you break that
yeah,
down?
yeah, finally there was a mirror. Now, here's what we're talking about when we, and this is not my work, it's someone else's, but window mirror. And actually it's window mirror and sliding door. So you can go back and forth. But a window
Mhm.
is when children see themselves in the curriculum. I already gave you the statistics about how they feel like they can do anything. 67% of children, when they see themselves, we needed to do a better job with creating a mirror. In fact, I think Bridget in our comment is
Mhm.
talking about that, saying what's sticking out is that it goes beyond purchasing books, but what are we doing
Mm.
about making this literature available? So, window. For children of color, there's always a window. They always can
Mhm.
look out and see other cultures represented, right?
Mhm.
And so the mirror piece is critical for students of color. Inclusive storytelling is crucial for education in a true democracy for several
Mm.
reasons. First, it fosters a sense of belonging. and representation for all members of society, regardless of their background, race, ethnicity, gender, or abilities. When students see themselves reflected in the stories and narratives presented in their education, they are more likely to feel valued and accepted, leading to increased engagement and motivation to learn. Now, here's the window piece. Inclusive storytelling encourages empathy and understanding among
Mhm.
students, helping them to develop really a broader perspective on diverse cultures, experiences, and viewpoints. By exposing learners to this wide range, the students develop a deeper appreciation for the complexities of this world, and they develop critical thinking skills that are essential for active participation in a democratic society. That's the connection. That's how
Mhm.
we're connecting the dots. That is the window in the mirror piece.
Mm.
Yes, that's it. That's it. So we've got to continue to do this. So my community was happy. And the white parents and families said, "Great. I want some of these books in my home so that I can be reading to my children so that I can too help support this." I can't find them. I can't find the books. Remember, we're talking 9 years ago. It's better. Lots of book lists are going out and going forth better. But 9
Yeah.
years ago, people were scouring and getting discouraged. They were not able to find them.
Mm.
They were.
Mhm.
They weren't. So it was a shift. It was a we got to go beyond the beautiful equity statement
Yeah.
that's posted all around the school. How are we living it? How are we
Mhm.
walking it? And as educators, how are we modeling it? So we modeled as a school for our parents. You got to find them. You got to do the research. And then you got to go across town because this bookstore was not local. It's local to St. Louis, but it was about
Mhm.
a 20-minute ride from the neighborhood school. And we're saying, take the kids in there. Let them look around. Let
Mhm.
them select. In addition to you coming here, let's go there. Let's patronize I See Me, not support,
Yeah.
not support.
Right.
Support is one time a year during Black History Month, we buy
Uh-huh.
I See Me. Patronize, be patron,
Yeah.
visit all over again and again and again. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
It's a routine. It's normalized.
It's a routine. It's where, hey, we need some books. We're going to I See Me, right? Not just a one-off, one time only. Not just that.
Well, and that's so much of how organizations and specifically schools approach DEI work, right? That
Absolutely.
is a one-time workshop, that was cool. We're never going to do that again, or maybe we'll do it next year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, how is that going to change anything? There's no shift that's going to happen culturally or organizationally if it's treated, as this one and done
Yeah.
kind of experience, right? Or a
Yeah.
volunteer
Yeah.
committee that is optional. All of these structures that make this work on the fringes,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
often on the labor of
The
women of color,
the women of
you
color.
know, it just creates this unsustainable movement,
Yeah.
right?
It does.
Like,
It does. And don't forget, I say this every webinar. Y'all are going to be able to repeat it after me, and I want you to. Equity work and anti-racism work is not an addition to the plate. It
mhm,
is the plate. It is the plate. We are moving beyond chequity. We're not checking
yeah.
about, we did a thing, boom, we did this one thing. The question to leaders and educators and folks in this work is yep, Anna put in there, it is the plate. She knows, she's worked with me. She's like, I got it. The question is, how do we make this sustainable? How do we make sure that it's not a paper plate, it's a porcelain plate? How do we make sure that it's not the flavor of the day? And that is doing things
Mm,
like this, making a commitment. From now on, our book fair is going to be hosted with I See Me and other companies that are willing to not make this optional, that are willing to not make this an appetizer on the plate, but the main course. It is the plate, it is the meal, right?
mm,
So that's democracy, y'all. That's education in a
mhm.
true democracy.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Yeah.
I read this piece recently by Kimberly Crenshaw, who
Mm.
is the brilliant woman of color who coined the term around intersectionality.
Personality. Yeah.
Um, and how she is seeing white people in, response to the progress that was made post 2020,
Yeah.
um, is from a place of fear, feeling threatened that their place in the racial hierarchy is going to be threatened, right? Like seeing a
Yeah.
black mermaid is going to somehow threaten,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know, we can't have a black mermaid. It's a mermaid. I mean, it's literally a fictional magical creature.
Yes.
Why can't it be black? Why
Right.
can't that character be black? Like there's so much fear because the way in which um, they feel about the inclusion of different people of the diversity is that then they're going to lose their spot on the hierarchy and some person of color, like another person of color, is going to come and take over that dominant spot, which is such
Yeah.
a white supremacist way of looking at
Absolutely.
intersectionality, because intersectionality is not a hierarchy, it's a
No.
web, right? It's a
Yeah.
beautiful interconnected web which illuminates that
Yeah.
there is no hierarchy. It is we are all, as humanity, we're all connected by these different identities that
Yes.
allow us to experience and see things differently, and that those differences are our strength, right?
Yes.
Those differences are
Yes.
what makes humanity so beautiful, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so it's not something that we need to fear. It's something we can embrace, because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, going back to what we were saying, we all are winners when we celebrate the diversity, right?
Yeah.
When we can
Agreed.
accept, celebrate, recognize these differences, we all become stronger, wiser, and better equipped to
Yeah.
create, affirming, just communities.
Yes.
Like your
Yeah.
school, your organization becomes a much more welcoming, loving
Yes.
institution. Um,
Yes.
who loses out on that? People, you
Yeah. Right.
only have things to gain by
Only have
making the
things
shift.
again.
So
Yes.
I'm curiously, like how, because it's hard. The momentum obviously is difficult. Just getting things started like this, like
Yes.
innovating something like this, is difficult, right? We know
Right.
embracing equity is a startup. It's
Yes.
hard to start something that didn't exist. Now
Yes.
that it did, right? How did you ensure that that partnership with I See Me was going to continue, that it
Yeah.
wouldn't just be a one and done? What were some things you did, or didn't do, like in
Yeah.
hindsight, you think could have
Could have been. Yeah.
solidified that
Yeah.
institutional, commitment?
Yeah, I think one of the things that, you know, made sense for me at that point, especially since there were a lot of parent volunteers, was to collaborate with my PTO organization to say, this is a commitment that we want to make. Let's talk about it. Like if I had an opportunity to do that months before, I probably would have done that, and then we would have moved together. it turned out that our families were ready and willing, and we're like, oh wow, this is pushing us and we're excited about it. It could have been
Mm,
the other way, right? It could have been like, oh no, I could have been met with, you know, people saying, oh no, because think about it. The parents that were in my school, they had scholastic book fairs when they were children, right?
right,
There
exactly.
were
It's
book
hard to
fairs.
break
It's
complacency or tradition.
And so I had to name that this is what we're doing because we need to move to not only awareness but action. So I would think, if I were in a school today and they're like, okay, this is something that we want to do, I think you would have that conversation. Like you would talk about, are we meeting our mission? Like, is it connected to our mission? It was very much connected to both our school mission and my personal mission
Right.
of doing this work, like really doing it, leading it, modeling it, all of those kind of things. And so I think, some of the lessons that I took is start early with saying, maybe you start in your summer planning. I always met with my PTO folks in the summer saying, okay, what are we kind of focusing on and doing this year collaboratively together? And that was one of the things that we said, all right, moving forward, this is our system. We're going to look
Mm,
for Black owned. We're going to look for groups who have been minoritized in
yeah.
this country, and particularly in St. Louis. Like, how can we bring in other voices and okay, I see me as small. Are there other smaller bookstores that we can also bring in too? Maybe we have 2 or 3 represented here to make up the masses of, selections that we can give here at this school. And so really saying, are we committed? Really asking ourselves, is this a one-off, or we just tick
Mm,
that? Are we going to go back to Scholastic as they try to? And I think for us, we made the commitment. We figured at some time Scholastic would kind of catch up, but we made that commitment. If we are walking in this commitment, we need to be helping, supporting our own here in St. Louis,
mm,
and the mirror piece. We want to hold up a mirror, a
yeah,
shiny mirror, not
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And that goes back to the senior management at Scholastic themselves, right? They are lacking diversity in their own team.
yeah,
And perhaps if they had more representation on that team and more shared power,
yeah,
nothing like this uh, uh, would have happened, or
yeah, yeah,
it could have been very different because Scholastic is such a giant in the publishing space. They could have
yeah.
actually made a stand in the opposite
Mm,
direction and said, "We're
yes,
gonna feature all of
yeah,
these books at every
yeah,
single book fair," you
yes,
know, like,
yeah,
fuck the laws, like, this is what
yeah,
we're going to do. That would have been a
yeah,
truly powerful stance as a company, right?
yeah,
To advance their, DEI statement that's on their website. They say Black Lives Matter on their social media. What
yeah.
does that mean in practice, right? What does that look like in
Exactly.
practice? So,
And that
I'm
and that
curious,
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, go
go
ahead.
ahead. I was gonna say that's the piece. Even though we're talking about this, I'm gonna say this, and then I want to hear your question.
Yeah, yeah.
But even, now I also say, when people say, "Oh, what books do you recommend, Dr. Evans, I can read to get me started on this journey?" And I say, I'm not against books because I need that and we need that, but what can you do beyond the books? I'm asking people beyond
Yeah.
the books. What action steps can you take? Was that a risk for me? It was. I was newer in my leadership there. I hadn't even been there for 5 years yet. I don't think I had been there even 3 years yet. And so people were
Mm.
still getting to know me. But to me, it was worth the risk, just like the risk you took. When you realized you were being shut down, that was a risk to you, your family, your income, bringing it in. And you said, I just cannot. I have to move on because I am being censored in this
Well,
way.
and it would murder my spirit, let's be honest,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes,
Just as it's
yes,
murdering the spirit of my students, It's
And that's
also it's also
yeah,
harming me,
yeah,
to be
and
an
that's where I
agent.
was. Yeah, sorry, I
Yeah.
didn't mean to talk over you,
Yeah,
but that's where I
absolutely.
was. It was also damaging white students who were not
Of
seeing
course.
the window piece, families of color, of different, you know, family structures.
Yeah.
They were not seeing those in books, right? So yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
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 Question. You had another
It
question.
was fascinating because one of my white students was like, "Oh, I'm so envious of you and, my friends because you guys have so much culture. Like you have
Mm.
these foods and language and and I'm like, your culture is so centered and
Oh my God.
so normalized that
Yeah.
you don't even think you have a culture." You know?
Mm.
It's the fish and the fox where,
Yeah.
the fox comes to visit the fish and is like, "How's the water?" And the fish is like, "What water?"
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
just we're so
Yeah.
immersed
Yeah.
in this white dominant
Yeah.
culture that, you know, often white students don't even realize
They
that they
don't.
have a culture. It's just
Yeah.
so centered and normalized all of the time. And that's also a disservice, exactly
Yeah.
to your point. They don't have these windows or experiences to understand their culture, but
Yeah.
also accept and appreciate others,
Yeah.
right?
Others. Yeah. And
So,
other cultures are always bumped up in comparison to, right? As people say, all the dash cultures, African American, Asian American,
mhm,
Hispanic American, all the dash is in comparison to,
yeah,
there's no dash in white Americans. There's no dash.
yeah, right.
That's the
Exactly.
subtle messages that we're sending about culture and
Mhm.
who's valued and who's not. Yeah.
Yes. That
Yeah.
reminds me of a really powerful poem. I'll read it to you all here. It's called
Yes.
Becoming Joey.
Mm.
It's by Paul Gorski. It says, Jose is 10, looks 6 by size, 20 in the eyes. Down the school morning street, Jose ambles along, dotted lines of big cheese buses that spit exhaust like expletives. Jose chokes on a few final moments of peace. Hand me downs hang from Jose's slenderness, patched and stained. Soles flop beneath battered shoes, worn but hanging on, if only by a lace.
Mm.
Jose pauses in the schoolyard where fairer kids laugh and scamper, unaware of this, his battle, of this, his burden, of this, his borderlands. Behind
Mm.
him, cracked sidewalks and frosty nights sweetened by the warmth of belonging.
Mm.
Before him, manicured playgrounds, colorful classrooms, lectures, and quizzes about a world that doesn't see him. Still,
Mm.
Jose moves forward, what feels in his stomach a regressive sort of forward. He straightens his shirt, dusting off the stains of ancestry, and he clears his throat, spitting out his Mexican voice. And
Mm.
becoming Joey, he crosses into school.
Mm. Mm. Wow. Wow. That's amazing.
And that's
And
very true to my experience
yeah.
of entering school. Just you're crossing it and constantly navigating white supremacy
Yeah.
culture, you know,
Yes. And
every day.
every day. And that's the thing that really sits and lives with me is that the experiences of spirit murdering that our children are having are happening in schools,
Yeah.
in my sector, in
Mhm.
schools, a place where you're supposed to be welcomed for your whole humanity and who you are and love and care. That's where it's happening. And so that's why we have to come have a true democracy in education. That's why
Yeah.
we have to hear stories like Joey's story, like your story, like my
Yeah.
story. Yeah.
Well, and you can't learn if you don't feel safe and welcome and like you belong there.
Yes.
The learning is not possible. Um,
It's not.
so I know we only have a few minutes. So I wanna bring us to some calls to action.
All right.
Um, how can individuals contribute to creating a more inclusive and equitable learning environment in their respective settings, given all of these realities that we discussed educators
Yeah.
facing today?
Yeah. I think, one of the things that I say is remember that you're not alone in this work. You're not alone. Reach out for support. I mean, organizations such as ours, Embracing Equity, we are here to support people in this
Yeah.
work because it is hard to do. I always say this, join the coalition of the willing, right?
Yeah.
Find like-minded people who are in your organizations already. They're there so that you can begin to center practices, policies, like you can begin to hold people compassionately accountable. Go to your leadership if that's not you to say, what are we doing? We do have a
Mhm.
beautiful statement. How are we living into it? What action steps are we taking? Also,
Mhm.
give. Give to organizations doing this work. Funders, we talked about this, are actually moving away. It's not the flavor of the day anymore from funding
Mm.
social justice work. We need support in funding this, right? Perhaps funders are bending under the pressure of others of not to do this work, not to support this work. So, what you can do is to say, listen, I want to financially support this work, and I'm going to support this work by taking it to my leaders or by being a leader who centers this work,
Yeah.
right? For
Right.
me, I lead a year-long leadership residency through
Yeah.
Embracing Equity so that you can move the needle in your organization. It's organizational work is what it is. Join us too in this. We're in that
Yes.
coalition of the willing. So
Yeah.
both, do both. Get to
Yeah.
action. Get to action. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And then through the leadership residency, they also would receive coaching, right? Because
Yeah.
just like we did at the beginning of this webinar with the case study, it's really important to be able to analyze all of the dilemmas that are at play and
Yeah.
even creating like a power map of where power exists.
Mhm.
That may not be really obvious initially, but once you map it out, then there are some new understandings and opportunities that can emerge for equity interventions, right?
Yeah.
There are possibilities. There is freedom dreaming that can happen when we can name the dilemmas that are at play, when we can name the objectives that
Yes.
we are what's
Yeah.
the point, the purpose, right? There is actually room to grow. That's what gives me hope,
Yeah.
especially in this current moment when the legal and political landscape um, to defend diversity and inclusion is fraught and uncertain, and nonprofits especially are
Yeah.
vulnerable, right? What gives me hope is, we have a community of support that has a bunch of tools. We have so many free resources that are designed to help freedom dream, help
Yeah.
illuminate things and pathways that we didn't even know were possible, and could exist, right? And that
Uh,
goes back to like the
yeah.
67% of students who see that there's a roadmap, that see there are other leaders who are doing this, there are other
Yes.
people who are m- fighting the same fight
Yeah.
in their local context. That
Yes.
instills that inspiration and sense of, "Oh, I can do this too."
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right now, just to mention it, right now I am in leadership residency with 11 organizations from the state of Minnesota. They want to make a
Mhm.
regional impact. They know how important this work is, despite the legal and political landscape, right?
Yeah.
Um, that's happening right now, right? We
And
need to protect.
especially because
Yes,
of the right?
especially, right,
Especially because of
especially,
it.
yeah, you're right,
Right.
especially because we're trying to protect diversity and inclusion. It is uncertain, right? And it's clear that these organizations who are fighting for equity and justice are at risk of being targeted.
Mhm.
But when
Yeah.
you join the coalition of
Mhm.
the willing,
Yeah.
right? You say this matters to us and we're forging ahead. That is also the beauty of the leadership residency. You are with a group of leaders across the nation who
Yeah.
saying this matters, it's important, and we are delving into this work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your story, Dr. Evans, and diving into it here on the webinar. Thank you to everyone who joined and will
Thank
be
you.
watching the recording. Join us for the next one. Give us feedback on these webinars. We love hosting them
Yes.
for ongoing conversations and learning, and really appreciate your presence, your dedication,
Yes.
and thank you for embracing equity with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Bye.
you, Dr. Evans.
You're welcome,
Bye.
Stacy.